Okay, one last video here to complete the lecture on attention. So we just finished talking about the neural effects of attention on the brain. So attention can boost the processing of a neuron. The neuron will start firing more as if it likes that stimulus even more, or as if that stimulus was all by itself amongst a crowd of distracting things. So attention allows us to drown out the other distractors and allow the thing that we're focused on to be by itself, essentially, in our minds. We saw some other ways in humans that we can measure these changes in the brain with respect to attention. So when we attend to a particular type of task, when we're doing one task versus another, we get increased blood flow. Even with the very identical stimulus, we get increased blood flow in networks that are associated with doing that task. And we saw that attention can also boost the processing of a visual stimulus. So if you attend to one side of space here and a stimulus comes on at that side of space, you get enhanced ERP amplitudes. You get more of the processing or better processing at each of these stages of visual processing. Or you can think of these as those hundreds and thousands of neurons that all have increased firing rate. So they create this bigger electrical potential on the head. Remember we talked about this exogenous versus endogenous types of attention. And so here's a good demonstration of that. You can be endogenously focused on writing your term paper, and you could be using one particular network of your brain, and then your colleague or your co-student might turn to you and yell, "Hey, look at this," and that will capture your attention in a bottom-up way and pull your attention towards them or what they're looking at on their screen and away from the thing that you had been focused on. And a different brain network will be involved in that capture of attention. So we have these two different attention networks in the brain that are associated with top-down and bottom-up attention. We can get damage to our brain's attention networks, and that can lead to very curious disorders of attention. For instance, one called hemi-neglect, in which when you get damage to your right parietal and temporal lobe, you can get this drastic change in your ability to attend to your visual field. What happens is that you start to ignore everything that's occurring to the left of where you're looking. And not only that, but you ignore the left side of objects. And so you're ignoring kind of a whole left part of the world. It's not that you're blind in that part of your visual field. If you have something appear in complete darkness and a light appears there, you'll see it. It's once things are competing for your representation in your mind and brain that this damage leads to this disorder called hemi-neglect, or visual spatial neglect. Here's one task that they give people to measure this. They get them to circle all the O's and cross out all the C's. And if you give people this type of task, you can often find that they ignore a whole side of the C's and O's. They might even ignore food on one half of their plate or stop grooming one half of their body. Oops. You can get them to copy pictures and they'll ignore the left side of the picture. So here they're ignoring the left side of the house and the left side of the flower. And even if you say, from memory, draw a lady or draw a clock, even from their memory, when it's not visually guided drawing, they'll ignore a whole half of the visual objects that they're drawing. So the damage is in the right, as I said, the right parietal and temporal areas, which are the same network involved in the bottom-up capture of our attention, the exogenous capturing of our attention. And so these people seem to have a disorder in that their attention gets captured too easily by the things in their right visual field, and they're unable to process things that are going on in their left visual field. Here's an overlay of the damage associated with this disorder. So here's a bunch of patients that had this hemi-neglect or visual spatial neglect, and they're overlaying their brain damage. So you can see it's their temporal and parietal lobe on their right side that seems to have common lesions. So the more yellow this is, the more common the lesion was in that particular location across the group of patients that had this disorder. Another disorder of attention that we can acquire is called simultagnosia, which is a difficulty in attending to more than one object at a time. So if you look at a complicated scene like this gentleman with the pyramid behind him on a camel, you show individuals this and they won't be able to process the scene as a whole. They won't be able to keep in mind the camel and the individual's dress and the mountain looking thing behind them and the sand, and think about the context of this as being a pyramid. They might say that this is a mountain because they can't attend to all these things all at the same time. This is usually associated with damage to the other attention network, the top-down attention network, that allows us to focus on things based off our internal goals. So we think about this network as being important for the localizing objects visually. So we have simultagnosia as a disorder of attention, and this hemi-neglect are two different disorders of attention that you can learn more about in Psych 377. So that's it for attention. We've talked about this spotlight of attention that can be moved around our sensory world. We can focus on our clothes, we can focus on the sounds we're hearing, we can focus on the tastes in our mouth, we can focus on certain tastes and ignore other tastes, we can focus on certain sounds and ignore other sounds. So attention works both within modalities and between different sensory modalities. We saw that attention works by increasing the neural activity of the areas that were processing those same things. It's going to increase the blood flow, increase the firing rate of neurons. It's going to increase the evoked potentials that we can measure with ERPs. We also talked about the networks of brain areas that are associated with controlling attention. In one case, a network that gets pushed around by external things happening. So a fire alarm or a cat jumping onto the stage might draw this exogenous attention control, whereas the goal of the individual or the task that they're doing or the job that they have might influence their endogenous goals of attention. And we saw that those two types of attention can break down and complementary in different ways. That when our exogenous capture of attention breaks down, we can get this disorder called hemi-neglect, where we'll ignore whole parts of space because they aren't able to exogenously capture our attention. When our endogenous top-down attention breaks down, on the other hand, we get this disorder called simultagnosia, where we have an inability to process multiple objects at the same time, which leads us to not be able to think about the bigger scene, the forest, and only able to focus on individual trees. So that's it for the lecture on gustation, olfaction, and attention. We're going to have a lecture in class on audition on Tuesday, and then we'll start on Thursday and Tuesday of next week talking about the somatosensory system, our skin, and about the motor system, our muscles of our body. See you then.